Couldn't see I have 155 to the next. No, honestly, this is an issue that's very close to my heart. I've got 3 young kids. They're 12, 10, and 8. And there's nothing more than I want for them to be here in this state, have a good paying job, where I can see my grandkids on a daily basis, or at least that they're in the state. We have to do a better job of making sure that we're providing opportunities for our future generations and students just like here at Colby to get plugged into our economy. Because of our workforce issue and because we have 50% of our workforce retiring in 5 to 10 years, we can't just stop there. We have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to attract new talent to this state. No matter if it's from New Hampshire or another country or another region of our country, we have to do a better job of making sure that Maine is an opening, welcoming place, because if not, our economy will not do well. So it's very personal to me to think about my 12-year-old daughter in 6 years, graduating from high school, and wanting her to go to a good college right here in Maine and stay here. We talk about that a lot. My kids are every motivation that I need to run for this race. As Speaker of the House, I drive 100 miles up and 100 miles down every single day to see my kids, usually sleeping in their bed after a long, long night. But that's all the motivation I need to wake up the next morning and drive the next 100 miles to keep fighting for families, keep fighting for opportunity right here in this state. So it's a whole host of policies that need to be implemented to attract young families here. And we have to be telling a different story about Maine. We need a champion for our state that is talking about the comeback stories of Waterville and downtown and the work that Kim Linloff and everybody's doing here. We have to be talking about Biddeford and Rockland and Dover Foxcroft and all the wonderful innovation that's going on here in our state. If we don't tell that story, nobody will, and we need people to look at Maine and give us a chance.
So I was born and raised in this state out in western Maine. My town had is known as having the last crank phones in the country. And before you say I had a rotary dial, no, I mean the real crank. So for me, I grew up and I watched most of my generation, or a good portion of it, leave. Many of my friends that I grew up with are all across the country. And we all have this fantasy that we're going to come back and then maybe there'll be jobs there waiting for us. But they're not coming back because there just aren't the jobs here. And so one of the things that we did, we found an upstart group of graduates and students years ago that I was part of. We realized that student debt was one of the biggest factors in whether or not people could stay here, because it wasn't just your salary, it was the salary against your expenses, right? So we launched a citizens initiative, and everybody said, you can't do that, you don't know what you're doing, you're too young, you just don't understand. We tried this and it's never going to happen. Well, we used our little idealism, and we went out and we stood on street corners, and we collected signatures to get it on the ballot. And now, if you go to opportunitymaine.org, if you don't know about this program, you should, because when you graduate from Colby, you will have waiting for you, if you work in this state, a tax credit dollar for dollar against your student loan payments. We have one of the best financial aid programs in the country because myself and a handful of upstarts that were told we can't do this went out and changed the system. And we did it because we understood more than anybody what that student debt would be, what that would be like. Now, I have significant amounts of student loan debt that I will probably die with, but the fact was that we were not doing that for ourselves. We were doing it for the next generation, for you, so that you'd have a chance to stay here. So that instead of having to look to Boston and New York and DC for salaries, you could actually get a salary here and still be able to pay your bills. And the best part is, employers have the ability to pay the student loan payments for you, for students or graduates. And you'll be able to, and they can take the tax credit for themselves, which means that you would be able to get your salary and not have to worry about your student loan payments.
Well, keeping young folks here, I mean, a lot of folks talk about it, but I've actually done it. I was 54 before I ran for the Senate. I'm 59 now. When I was 37, I started my own business. I had left a good job, a good salary, and health insurance, and I started out on my own. Doing wetland science and vernal pool biology, and I built it up to an 8-person company over a 21-year period. I actually sold it last spring, so I have to update my bio, I guess. But I've actually done it. I'm an optimist for Maine. I think you young folks in the audience, don't take the naysayers at their word. You can have jobs here in Maine. My son works for the company that I started. He was born here in Maine in South Portland. I graduated from UMaine Forestry School. My parents both graduated from there, and both of my kids are now have graduated from University of Maine, and they both work here in Maine. And my stepson works here in Maine, and we're going to get my stepdaughter moved back here to Maine from Miami once she has our granddaughter, we hope. So it's not enough to just talk about it. You have to have someone in leadership that's done it and believes that we can do it. You know, our forest products industry has had some downturn. It went from $9.8 billion total market value in 2014 down to $8.5 billion market value in 2016. So it's still an $8.5 billion industry. Baileyville Mill has invested, Sappy's investing in Skowhegan. The University of Maine is doing excellent research on the bioeconomy, things that we can do with forest products that are in the next generation of the economy. Aquaculture is in a growing area for the economy of Maine, and small agriculture is growing in Maine. Maine is increasing the numbers of farmers, male and female farmers under the age of 35 now. I'm seeing it happen in my town of Gorham. So I'm an optimist. I think we have our best years ahead of us. You know, when I started in the forest industry in the 1970s, Millinocket was the place to be. It was boomtown. I mean, it was doing great. So there are changes, but we have to adapt, and I've shown that I have adapted, and I want to lead that adaptation into the future. I think we have a bright future, and we should be optimistic.
I concur with Jim. The wages up in the forest logging firms went from $30,751 to 204 to $38,000 in 2014. Pardon me, $42,795. So there's evidence that good wages can be had here. But before we talk about anything, what we need to have in the Blaine House is, like Jim was saying, a positive attitude. We have to have a can-do attitude, an attitude of team building, a collaboration with the community and government. We need a leader that has the work experience, the academic preparation, and team building skills to elevate Maine's business from the climate. We rank 33rd according to Forbes in business climate. That's just the climate. But when you have a positive attitude, a lot of things can happen. In skilled areas of new job creation, Maine will need environmental scientists, biologists, chemists to track climate change and to support our marine, farming, and manufacturing communities, such as IDEC, VHB, composite industry slated for Brunswick Landing, advanced composites manufacturing, aviation, aerospace, marine sciences. We need to invest in education, and that means that we have to do something for you guys. You know, you pay $33,000 a year semester here. I don't know how in God's name, unless you've got somebody with means supporting you to come out of here with $250,000 debt, how you can possibly earn enough in a lifetime to be able to pay all that off. And like she was saying, that the kinds of things, the tax incentives and those kinds of things, we need education, we need health care, like she was saying. We can't expect people to be join the workforce if they're drug addicted or if they're mentally ill. We have to beef that situation up as well. Thank you.
Well, so I think the first thing we have to do is stop asking old people how we keep young people here. Because I think that's often what happens, and it happens a lot in government. We ask the wrong people the wrong question, right? So the first thing we need to do is talk to young people and say, what does it take? What is it going to take for you to stay here? I have 3 beautiful daughters as well. I've got 2 who are sophomores in college and 1 who just graduated from college. And they're not coming back here for a while. They'll come back here eventually, but they're out exploring the world, and actually I'm glad for that. I want them to explore there, but I want them to come back. And I want us to have that sense of community. We are so separated from one another. It's hard for us to have those connections and to make them. And so one of the proposals that I have is I want to offer every student, every high school senior in Maine, an opportunity to give 1 year of community service, doing daycare, care for the elderly, weatherizing homes, teaching English to new immigrants, new Americans coming in. And in exchange for that 1 year, you get 4 years of free tuition at any college or technical school in Maine. Not just the University of Maine, but the Colbys and the Bates and the University of New England's and the Thomases. Because that will help us, one, remember that we're connected. It helps build community. That sense of optimism, we can talk about it, but unless you experience it, that incredible joy of actually doing something that matters to somebody, of being needed and being able to be of service, and we do that, and then in exchange for that, you get to stay in Maine at one of these incredible institutions that we have of higher learning. I know you all just made the top 10 of the top list of all the best liberal arts colleges in the country, all of the ones that Maine did, so that's fantastic. But I think we have to start to actually do it. And I think that's one way. Offering this one-year program after high school graduation is one way to do it. I think we also have to do that entrepreneurship and that tech stuff. We have to have broadband across the state and good coffee north of Portland.
Debbie? Thank you. I think the universal answer to the question is yes, obviously, at least at this table. I can't imagine anybody in the state saying, no, we don't want young people to be here, we don't want young people to stay here. We all know that issue is very, very lively, and in my case, it's personal too. I did leave the state for a number of years. I worked for a while, went back to school, worked, went back to school, and worked some more before I came back to Maine to go to law school. And I enjoyed the opportunities I had elsewhere to learn different cultures and different way things are done in other states. And I brought up 5 lovely daughters in this state. 3 of them are still in the state, 2 have left for other opportunities. 4 grandchildren in this state. And I do want them to be able to stay if they want to, or leave and come back if they want to. I want them to have the opportunity to raise their families here. And that means a lot of things. It means not just high-tech jobs, although that's part of it. It means broadband, which means it gives people the opportunity to work from their homes and to have tech jobs, but also education of a variety of sorts. And matching our voc tech schools and our academic institutions with the workforce of the future, very clearly. And also basically trades and other jobs. I had a lawsuit a couple of years ago against bath fitters. I don't know if you know what that does. They renovate your bathrooms, and they do a good job, but they weren't using licensed plumbers. So I sued them, and I got an injunction. I got them to behave better, and I got some money from them. And I said, what am I going to do with this money? Well, I looked around, I called around. I found that there were not enough plumbing programs in the state of Maine at the secondary level. So I started a plumbing program at Lewiston High School, Mount Blue High School, Oxford Hills High School, and Biddeford High School, and I said, get some girls in those programs too. And I'm proud to say that as of June, this past June, the highest achieving voc tech student at Mount Blue High School was a young woman in the plumbing program. So I'm about getting stuff done.
The issue of keeping and retaining and attracting young people to the state of Maine is one that I've actually spent a ton of time thinking about in my life. I've lived it wearing different hats. I come from a lower income town. About 70% of our kids in many of our schools in Sanford are on free and reduced lunch. I was a good student at a public school and didn't, as they say, realize I was poor until I got to Colby. And so I've seen sort of both aspects of that. I saw the top students at Sanford High that I went to school with not living in Sanford anymore. And a lot of my friends here at Colby, as much as they love the state of Maine, it was a stop-off in their life. And for both, whether it was from Sanford or from Colby, it really came down to opportunity. It wasn't that they didn't love Maine. It wasn't that they really didn't like being here. But if you have more opportunity in Boston, New York, Chicago, Denver, Austin, you're going to go there. And that's what folks have been doing. I've been around the world, not only as working in business and in law, but in the military. There are 7 billion people in the world. We got a little spot on Earth, 1.3 million people. And I believe I've seen cultures where literally they've got their back against the wall. And it's not just about war and violence. It's just with natural resources. We have such an ability here in Maine to provide for ourselves. So many of our constraints, I think, are in our heads. We really can grow our economy. We can be one of those cool places where young people want to be, not just for vacation. Renewable energy, I hope I get the opportunity to talk about, because I think we can be a global leader. not a regional leader, not a national leader, but a global leader in this. And I think it would excite and attract people to be here and to start businesses in the state of Maine.
All right. Our third question is about education, and we're going to start at the other end with Betsy Sweet. What are your priorities in the area of education policy for pre-K to 12 system of public education? What education initiatives of the current administration should be kept in place, if any, and which should be altered or ended?
It's an essay question.
It's a two-part question.
4 minutes.
Yeah. So education is obviously, I think, one of the most important foundations of any state, any democracy. And so I think in Maine and in our public schools, where all my kids went through public schools here in Maine, I think one of the things we have to do is have an education that matters. We have gotten so focused on education towards standardized tests that we have forgotten what real learning is. So kids are under pressure, and teachers are under pressure. Our systems are under pressure all the time to meet a standardized learning test. Now, yes, we have to have proficiency-based learning. And yes, we have to understand what that means. And so people who graduate with some skills and some knowledge. But you know, I think one of the things I talked to a school teacher about it the other day, was the country of Finland went from being one of the lowest, worst education systems in the world to being the #1 smartest, most productive education system in the world. So one thing we gotta do is talk to them. And any of you who saw the Moore's movie, you know, Who Should We Invade Next? They asked them what the most important thing was about their education system, and it's where kids felt they were worried about their happiness, and they were where they felt included, and they learned social skills. It used to be that education was to teach information. All the information you need is in that flip phone you're holding, that cell phone you're holding. So our education system has to be about how do we get along, how do we inquire further, how do we use that information in a way that leads to jobs, and how do we teach human interaction, conversation skills, and skills that keep us in community and connected. It's something that we've lost in our education system, and I think is really, really important. I also think we have to focus on preschool education. When we look at the opioid addiction, the #1 determinant of opioid addiction is adverse childhood experiences. We spend too much of our money on this end and not enough money here in Head Start and other important programs, and I think we need to switch those priorities.
Thank you. I'll take the last part of the question first, I guess, because I think one thing that I would agree with the current administration on is bridging high school to college, bridging high school to community colleges as well, and allowing students in high school to take college credit courses in their senior year, getting credit for that, and getting rid of the cliff that exists after you graduate from high school and you go, whoops, what now? And allowing kids to transition, young people to transition into a post-secondary environment. So I approve of that. There are a lot of things he's done I don't approve of. But I think in reinforcing our education system, sometimes the simplest solutions are the best, and that means paying teachers. My mother was a school teacher for public schools for 35 years. She was a real good teacher. But teachers left Farmington to go work in Skowhegan because they had a mill there and they get paid $10,000 a year more than a teacher in Farmington. Equalizing the pay opportunities for teachers means a better, more equal opportunity for kids to have a good education. Providing 55% of state funds for education, finally, that would be a great goal. One thing I would work for diligently in my tenure as governor, making sure the state pays its fair share. Finding out what works in Yarmouth and certain schools that have achievements in different areas, and making sure that those things apply and can be done in Fort Kent, Farmington, Machias, and Kittery as well. And again, matching the academic institutions, high school and college, and I'm talking cradle through college. And the education system has to be looked at holistically, and looking at programs like the Boys and Girls Club in Waterville, and the great programs they have, post-school, after-school programs, and that kind of thing, and early childhood education. That's extremely important. Child's brain develops so early. And making sure that we have the the right programs for the right jobs, the jobs of the future. That's key. Thank you.
Well, education is incredibly important, obviously, to revitalizing the economy in the state of Maine. I come from a family of educators as well. My dad taught at Sanford High for 30 years. My wife's a teacher, my brother's a teacher. I served on the Sanford School Committee for a number of years, and the most important thing that we need to do right away is start funding education in the state of Maine. Cutting revenue sharing that the governor did was disastrous, particularly in my community. We had a budget of $30 million in our school. It was cut $1.4 million. We couldn't fund teaching positions. When teachers retired, we wouldn't fill their spots. We had to cut sports, we had to cut the arts. And also, the legislature during this time supported universal pre-K, but it wasn't funded. Also implemented proficiency-based learning without describing to school districts how to implement it. So educators could not understand best practices. An education policy under my administration will start with universal pre-K, and it'll go right up to, like I said, that 53-year-old mill worker and working it out. And it'll also address, I think, what we have in the state of Maine as an aspirational gap. We have so many kids that get out of our schools. We have a high school graduation rate, but a very low rate who actually get a 2-year or 4-year degree. In many ways, it's because they can't afford it. And also, I think there's just that sense of Maine kids, lots of times, that we have to really encourage them to try harder and to go to the next level. So I'll be focusing on that. I'll be talking about it. I have a huge interest, obviously, of several kids in the Maine schools as well. So college affordability will be incredibly important. We're going to be rolling out a policy to help make that happen as well, so we could make it the same way Colby has it, so it's affordable for everybody that applies and gets accepted.
Great. Well, one of the things that I had to negotiate with my kids is getting rid of standardized testing if we are successful in this. It was a negotiation around the kitchen table, but it is one of those things that takes an incredible amount of time. Teachers are frustrated with it. Kids are certainly frustrated with it. And you have to scratch your head and wonder what are we using it for. Beyond that policy and beyond a heavy investment in our pre-K system, what I would like to do and what I would do as governor is invest heavily in our vocational training centers so that we are rebranding our opportunities for our kids that might not think that there's a 2-year and 4-year college out there for them, that they can see a pathway after high school to a meaningful job. So after a 4 to 8 year administration, what I would hope is that people are talking about vocational training programs as premier educational tracks for kids. That it's not a secondary education, that it is premier. It is front of the class stuff that you want to be a part of. So that can be aligned with our traditional trades, manufacturing, forest products industry, but it can also be aligned with what's around the corner and over the horizon with 21st century jobs, whether it's computer science or digital programming or things that are we need to be paying attention to as a state for our kids. But it's a heavy investment in those vocational training programs that is aligned with our community college system. I spent time working on a vocational training program with 3 community colleges in the northern part of the state, where we worked with the logging industry to identify a workforce need and what kind of training programs they needed. We worked together with Republicans, with private sector. Caterpillar put in $1 million worth of investment. And about 6 weeks ago, the first graduating class graduated from Millinocket. Those kids can now get a job with a logging contractor, make $40,000 to $50,000 a year, and a part of the state that's real money, that they can buy a home and stay right in the community where they want to. We have to make sure that we are aligning what the needs are in certain communities with what types of investments we're making in our vocational training programs.
So when I was a kid, I was in an elementary school that I later learned the community was terrified was going to burn down with a strike of a match or an appliance that was left in too long. And so they built a brand new school, an elementary school, and I had the ability to learn, be one of the first classes that graduated from that elementary school. And it was a transformative experience between the opportunities that I had at the old school and the new one, because the center itself, the environment itself was groundbreaking. But right now, we're seeing all across the state that schools are crumbling. We have a maintenance scenario where the communities don't have the money to invest in their schools, and so they go away, they go along, and then there's no investment, and then all of a sudden they're competing to be one of the worst schools in the state so that they can actually get their schools replaced. We don't have a maintenance program that allows communities to be able to maintain those schools because it all comes through the school funding formula down to the local level. We need to change that dynamic so that we're making those investments in the schools, that we're able to have those investments stand longer than they are. But one really important thing that I think needs to be said is that last fall, Maine people went to the ballot box and they voted for a 3% tax on the wealthy in this state to fund education. And that 3% tax was repealed. And politicians went in and said, well, we know better than the people. And essentially it was parents, it was teachers, it was students who came out and said, we would like our education funded and you have chosen not to do it. Here's what we're gonna do to do it. And we passed it. And then the people that went and tried to defend it at the State House, and it was scooped up in the budget and it disappeared. That is not the path forward. We need to trust the people in this state to make good decisions. We need to make sure that when they do make those decisions at the ballot box, that those are respected, and then we make sure that we're funding education. A lot of the challenges that we faced comes down to funding, and that 3% tax would have made a huge difference, and Maine people voted for it. We should have respected that.
It's a little tricky going next to last, because a lot of these issues we agree on. But I would start with saying we need to restore revenue sharing. When I first got to the Senate, I was shocked to see how much revenue sharing, municipal revenue sharing was cut. I remember being on a bus traveling to like training development programs we went to, and the whole bus couldn't believe it. We could just cut millions of dollars from municipal revenue sharing. And so, and we never did, we haven't met the 55% state funding for education. So I think we need to do, certainly as Democrats, we want to do, and I want to do those two things. Your beginning of your question was, I think, early childhood or K-12. I think we all know, I've seen studies that show that for kids from birth to age 5, for every dollar invested in them, we save $7 after the age of 18 and other costs. And those studies are supported by the military, by businesses, by law enforcement. So we know as a society that that's important things for us to be doing, and that's what I want to support. One of the things I'll support as governor. The other things I think has been touched on, career, vocational, technical training for kids who want that for their pathway. Not everyone is going to go on to four-year college and a bachelor's degree. So we need to incentivize kids that want a different pathway that they have available. One of the things that this administration has done, or at least has been done during this administration's time, is online learning has improved a lot, has gained a lot of ground in the last few years in the University of Maine system. And I recently read about University of Maine at Presque Isle really making good headway on online learning. And I think that's an area where folks like my cousins or the friends of my cousins that lost their jobs in the mills in their 40s, that's an opportunity for them in a rural community, if broadband access is available and made available, that they could improve their educational opportunities by online learning.
Well, I've got 3 children, 2 of them are teachers, and you couldn't dynamite them out of Maine because we love it, and we've been here for the last, I've been here for the last, for my wife and I, for 45 years. St. Ignatius Loyola once said that if he had a child till they were 8 years old, they'd be a Catholic forever. And interestingly enough, Mao Tse-tung said the same thing about a communist. So the first 8 years are incredibly important. So therefore, definitely in favor of K through at least 12. And also for training. I agree with everybody here on this panel. But what I think as a start in this state we need, again, is an attitude change. We have to look upon our children as our most precious commodity, and that we have to provide them a good education for all 55% revenue, all the rest, whatever we have to do to provide a good education, because that's going to pay off in long-term dividends. poverty, when we have hunger like we have in a state with our children, that one of the major reasons for mental retardation, and I had the good fortune at one point to teach a summer course in nursing on this, number one of the major reasons for mental retardation is cultural familial deprivation. It isn't brain injury and all the rest of it, but a major cause is cultural familial deprivation. So it's all the more important that we focus on education, because what is education today? That teacher, okay, the mom and dad both have to work, they drop the child off at daycare or at school. The teacher's role has changed now. He's not only a teacher, but he also has to be a part-time parent, and they don't get the credit. So we have to have an attitude, and that means that we pay decent wages to our teachers.
Thank you, everyone. We're coming up onto our last question. For this one, we'll be beginning with Ms. Diane Russell. So this question is pretty important to Waterville specifically. The state government can have an impact on municipal property taxes. Do you believe the state government should help reduce municipal property taxes? And if so, how do you propose to do that?
Absolutely. So schools are actually a significant portion of your property tax payments. And so you've heard people talk about revenue sharing. There's a lot of folks that may know what that means. There's a lot of folks that may not. But basically it means that the taxes that go into the state and the town share that revenue. And so over a course of time, there was a significant amount of money that the state would send back to the towns through that revenue sharing process. And when the governor came in, let's not say president, when the governor came in, he started cutting that revenue sharing by massive, massive portions. And it has been actually a bipartisan fight to restore that revenue sharing. And what that means is that when that money then, instead of going to you, into Waterville, and to the other communities in the state, when it stays in the state, that means that you have to pay more on your property taxes. And usually that money went to offset property taxes and or education. So you have the education money, and then you have this revenue sharing money. When you lose a significant portion of that, it raises your property taxes. Additionally, we used to have what was known as the circuit breaker program, which would put money once a year back into the pockets of Maine residents. So we would pull it out of taxes at the state level, and we would restore it. We got the governor, when the Republicans took over in 2011, they pulled that entirely. They eliminated that program. There was such a backlash that Democrats were able to really push to put some of that back into what we call the property tax fairness credit. But at the end of the day, the problem with property taxes is just how regressive it is, meaning that the lower income people pay a higher percentage and proportion of their income than, say, higher income people. And so the more that we burden people with property taxes, that burden is not actually shared equally, or equitably, I should say, among the income levels. So reducing property taxes through revenue sharing and increased access to school funding is really important.
Yeah, I want to reduce municipal property taxes too. That's what I talked about earlier, was increasing revenue sharing back to what was agreed to in the 1970s. It would be 5%. That was the deal that was struck in the 1970s, and it's been whittled away quite a bit since then. It's about half of what it was. So I don't think that's fair to go back on the deal that you made. And again, and it is regressive. Diane's described that. So, and I'm against anything that's regressive. I've been talking about working people. That's why I'm running. And so I think we need to move away from more reliance on property taxes. I would also rebalance the three legs of the stool: property, sales, and income taxes. We can take a look at sales taxes, and that this is an area where the governor, and in the past Republicans had even agreed that we would come up with a way to increase the sales tax and put some of the burden on vacationers that would really not notice it that much. That's what's done in other states. And then Mainers, low-income Mainers, would have an earned income tax credit available to them. And then there would also be a property tax fairness credit particularly for seniors or low-income folks at the municipal property tax level. I would support that. And The other thing is, I think we need to evaluate, well, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, you know, people think of we get accused all the time as Democrats of being liberals, okay? I think what we have to do to get more agreement with the other side, with the Republicans and so forth, is when we talk about things, talk about it in terms of ROA, return on investment. With education, I just want to make this point, we now have this talk about charter schools. Well, that adds fuel to the fire. You start taking for charter schools here and there, you get less money in the pot for public education. So we've got to keep an eye on that. The other thing is when you talk about this three-legged stool like sales tax and not profit sharing, by not sharing, revenue sharing, I should say, that hurts everybody. That hurts, particularly it hurts. We have the largest population of elderly in the country. I think we're only second to Florida. And the thing is, picture this, an elderly woman living on fixed income, watching the sales tax go up and trying to hold on to their home, watching her property tax rise, watch the Medicaid premium price goes up. It's just murder. And so we've got to start thinking in terms of return on investment. We have to start thinking, we talk about, like Jim just mentioned, tax credit, things that are equitable, so that it isn't just a generalized way of doing business. We have to start thinking, and it goes back to my initial comment, was that we need somebody in the Blaine House that has some gray matter up here, has some work experience, some business experience, and has some compassion. I yield my time.
Yeah, Diane did a great job of explaining revenue sharing. Of course we need to get rid of, we have to lower our property taxes. Our tax code in the state and in this country is messed up, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. When we look at the regressive taxes, sales tax and property tax, those are the ones that continue to go up. The most progressive tax we have, the income tax, is the one where they spend the most time, where politicians spend the most time trying to make sure that people at the top don't have to pay too much. And so what we do is instead of, you know, I love when people argue all the time about what the top rate should be for the highest income earners in the state and the highest business earners in the state. But in fact, the actual tax rate that those people pay is way less than people in the middle class and in the working class. Why? Because they have attorneys and tax attorneys and accountants who find all the loopholes. And so we have someone like President Trump, for example, like many, many millionaires who pay nothing. Where people who make $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, pay a lot in income tax, and then they have high property taxes and high sales taxes on top of that. That's not fair. It's not okay, and we need to have the guts to start talking about it. And you know who the lobbyists are on tax reform? Who do you think sat in that room in Washington to develop the new tax plan? Have you taken a look at it? So a teacher who's buying supplies for her classroom can't write off those expenses, but a business, a multinational corporation that flies a Learjet to go see somebody for their business, they can write that off? That's not okay. And that's what we have to start doing. But we're so afraid to talk about taxes. We've made it such the boogeyman in this state and this country to talk about it because we get accused of being tax and spend liberals, tax and spend liberals. We have to get a taxation system that is fair, that reflects people's ability to pay. And remember that taxes are investments in our community, in each other, and in our future.
Thank you. The question was about property taxes. And I would add to some of the previous comments, it's the Republicans who are harping on the income taxes and trying to create at the state level and the national level big tax breaks for the richest Americans and the richest corporations. It's not us Democrats. The Republican politicians trying to do that. So let me talk about property taxes. More than a year ago, I was campaigning with some candidates in the city of Auburn. Came across an older couple laying to their door. I stepped out on the porch and met with them, and they were in tears. In tears. Let's call them the Vaughns. And I said, "What's wrong?" They said, We're being evicted from our house. The city's taking our house because we can't pay the taxes. We're in our mid-70s. We don't work anymore. We're on fixed incomes. I said, what happened? He said, well, we got scammed by one of these fraudsters who prey on senior citizens in particular. They lost all their life savings and they couldn't pay their property taxes, and now they were losing the home that they lived in most of their lives and raised their children in. When I was in the legislature, we created some remedies for situations like that. We created the circuit breaker program so that if your income was of a certain proportion, the taxes were of a certain proportion to your income, you would get a huge tax break. And that applied to renters as well as property owners. So the renters in the city of Lewiston, the city of Portland, and in inner city areas could get a tax break also, get a break on their rent. We created that, and I'm willing to go back to the drawing boards and create it again. I worked across the aisle in the Appropriations Committee and in the Maine legislature with Republicans and Democrats to create the homestead exemption, the property tax exemptions we had for quite a while, and the circuit breaker programs, and to help regionalize municipal programs like salt sheds and whatnot to reduce municipal taxes as well. Thank you.
Hey, so one of the challenges of being the last in line here is if some of the folks really address it already, it's trying to sound new and original and keep you all awake. Good group here tonight, but I think Diane nailed it with the revenue sharing. Went from 7.95% income tax. The governor said he wanted to reduce the income tax, so he did it by cutting payments to municipalities. I told the story being on the school committee where we lost $1.4 million of our school budget. Also a big proponent, I am as well, of the circuit breaker program, the homestead exemption, circuit breaker for the renters, homestead for the folks that have it. With the time that I have, since they've repeated a lot of those things, I want to talk about expanding tax base within a lot of municipalities. I talked a little bit about renewable energy, and I tell you, this could be an absolute boon for the state of Maine, particularly in the rural areas, particularly in the mill towns. Solar in particular, I've spent a lot of my career working in this. I've worked with municipalities. Recently signed one of the largest deals, solar deals in Maine history in Kennebunk, which sounds like a great thing until you find out it's 3 megawatts. If you know anything about energy, that's more a statement of how poor the solar industry is in Maine, rather than being a great project. But the fact of the matter is, this expands the property tax base of a lot of these municipalities that are having a hard time doing that. In my hometown of Sanford, which I talked about quite a bit earlier, they're looking at a massive energy project on a former brownfield. And brownfield, basically, it's one of these areas you can't build a lot of things because there's a lot of environmental problems. These are areas where we can really grow our economy in the local tax base, expand the property tax revenue for our local area, produce clean, renewable power, create jobs, but we're holding back. We're not seeing the innovation. We're not seeing the ability to do that. As governor, that's the type of thing that I'd be proposing that we do a lot more of to expand the property tax and the base for these municipalities. Thank you.
One thing that hasn't been said on the panel, although I do agree with just about everything that folks are saying, is the reason why revenue sharing was zeroed out, the reason why the circuit breaker program was zeroed out is because 2 years prior, the governor proposed a tax plan that wasn't paid for. And we can talk about the values of what our tax structure should look like, income, property, and sales, but they passed a budget that kicked the can down the road. $400 million was not paid for. And when the bill came due, two of the major places they went for money was revenue sharing and the property tax fairness credit. It says a lot about your values and priorities. And yet the question was, should we have any involvement in helping towns and residents with their property taxes? Well, I want you to ask that question to an 82-year-old grandmother named Pat Seavey in North Berwick when I knocked on her door in 2008. Very similar story. It's heartbreaking, it's crushing. When property taxes are going up and you have a fixed income, there's not a whole lot you can do. But you hope that people are going to look out for you as you look out for others. And those programs, like the Property Tax Fairness Credit or the Circuit Breaker Program, are there for a reason. They're there to pay property taxes. They're there to pay for your oil for the winter. And we can argue a lot about what the tax structure can look like, but we should all agree that we need to pay for whatever program we implement. The governor decided to give a massive tax cut to those that were well off at the expense of those that were trying to put it together. And that is one fundamental difference between the policies that have been pushed for 7 years and the ones that I would lead. We have to think about Pat Seavey, we have to think about the Bonds, and a whole host of other individuals in our communities. We've got to get back to making those investments and those commitments that we've made over the years, and as governor, I would.
And that concludes our questions. Now each candidate will have 2 minutes closing statements, and we're going to start on this end with Janet Mills.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here this evening, and I thank the Chamber of Commerce and Colby and Thomas Colleges for the chance to speak to you. I always learn something more when I come to these events and I talk to people in the audience and people on the stage. I served for 4 years on the Appropriations Committee, so I've had some experience dealing with state budgets. We dealt with the state budget at times when it was really tough during the recession of 2008. We did, I think, 7 budgets in 4 years, and we managed to keep the basic social safety net of state government. We protected public safety, we protected education. I know where to start when I get into the blame house, how to begin to repair the damage that the current administration has inflicted on our society. I have run as an executive agency with a $42 million budget, so I know something about running budgets. In the private sector, I ran a small business. I worked in a small business. I represented individuals and small businesses and their legal needs throughout Western Maine. And I'm proud of that experience. My husband passed away 3 years ago. The last year of his life was a tough one for my girls and me, but we struggled. We learned that this is what thousands of Maine people go through every year, dealing with a complicated healthcare system, which is a part of our economic challenge. And I learned, and I got to know so many CNAs and therapists and nurses, and it's those people I think about every day when I get up to go to work to protect the civil rights and constitutional rights of Maine people. Those people working at low-wage jobs, trying to put bread on the table. And I want a state where my kids and my grandkids can stay if they want to, and raise their families if they want to. I want a place where every senior has health and happiness and heat in their home, where every veteran, each one a hero, has a place to go to in the morning and a home to go to at night, where every child goes to school on a full stomach, not an empty stomach, where small businesses can thrive because they are the backbone of our economy. That's the kind of state I want. With your help, we'll get there. I look forward to your support. Thank you.
So, okay, I was a little confused.
Yes.
It's great to be back at Colby. This place has been so important to me and throughout my entire life. When I think about this race, and I talked a little bit about some of my experiences, I can remember being in Afghanistan for my 3rd deployment. And if you're familiar with those logging roads up in northern Maine that just have this compact dirt, because trucks have been driving on them forever, and they're really compact, and you couldn't grow anything on them if you tried. You think about that road and try expanding it in your mind hundreds of miles. And that's what it looks like in Afghanistan. Everywhere you go, they can't grow anything out there. You just see how farmers will take a modest amount of water that they can get and divert it so they could try to grow something. And I remember coming back from that deployment and thinking, you know what, looking in my backyard, if somebody came here from Afghanistan, they would say, I like your grass, but why aren't you growing something? Why aren't you growing vegetables or something? And I'm not advocating we start Liberty Gardens or anything, but we have an abundance of resources here. We ought to be able to have the best public schools in the country right here in Maine. We should be able to provide health care for our people. Put this opioid crisis in the rearview mirror by treating it as an addiction. We ought to be able to grow our economy in our rural areas and our mill towns I believe renewable energy is a great way to do that, but there are other ways as well. I think so many of the constraints we have are around mine. I would love to have you take an interest in our campaign. We're putting a phenomenal team together. I would love to have your support. I believe in my heart and soul we need a new generation of leadership that are going to stand up at this time and lead the state of Maine, and I'd love to have your support in this race. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you again. I think this was very well professionally run, and thank you guys for being here and sticking out the entire time. I'm running for governor, as I said before, has a lot to do with my kids' future and the future of kids like my kids' friends. And when we just went through an election where we had our presidential candidates really ripping each other apart, and it was the nastiest election that I've ever seen, and having to explain to my 12, 10, and 8-year-olds about what was going on, it broke our hearts. Laura and myself thought a lot about why we wanted to run for governor, and it had a lot to do with our kids were growing up in an era where their political leaders were encouraging them to see the worst in each other. I led in the State House as Speaker of the House for 4 years in a pretty toxic environment, pretty politically divided environment. We were able to get some pretty good things done. Affordable senior housing, bond property tax relief, a whole host of things. The way that we were able to do that was not by saying, I'm a Democrat and I have all the best ideas and you're not. It was by engaging with people. One relationship that I'm really proud of is the one that I developed with Pt2. He's the president of the Maine State Senate. He's running for governor on the other side as a Republican. And when he announced, I got a bunch of texts saying the bromance was over. But it's really not over. We continue to be good friends today. We need to get back to the era where you can do that, where you can argue on the floor of the House, where you can arm wrestle about stuff, but you can also be friends. You can also take an interest in each other's families. Mike and myself did that. And the reason we did that, because we knew there was a lot at stake. We weren't going to shut down state government. We were going to do what we could in the environment that we were in. We need a champion for our state that will allow for a very big table of good ideas. I'm very proud of the way that I conducted myself. I hope that I led with some integrity. I hope that I go home, my kids are proud of their dad, and that Laura still lets me in the door. You know, there's a lot of reasons why I'm running for governor, but one of which is I want a different world for my kids.
This is great to see so many people here out, and thank you for everybody that's putting this together. Yay, college Democrats here in Colby. As I said before, I'm running for governor because I believe that our system is broken and we need to change it. And we're at a real monumental moment in time, and I believe that Maine is the battleground for the future of our democracy, not just here, but across the country. And we have a unique opportunity. We have seen Donald Trump come long before everybody else did with Paula Page, and we have an opportunity to change the direction once and for all and move to a more progressive direction. So I'm running to put power back into your hands. Now, why is someone like me, who is a little on the young side, capable of delivering the kind of systemic change that we need to move the state forward? Well, I don't know how many people here voted for Bernie Sanders, but I sure did. And I led the fight nationally to change the superdelegate system once and for all, and to restore power back into the actual people who showed up to the polls on election day in the caucuses all across the country, and to put power back into those hands. And Bernie Sanders asked me to speak at the Democratic National Convention to convey to Democrats across the country how we had effectively changed the way we elect and nominate the President of the United States of America. That is systemic change. When I came forward 10 years ago and started bringing this idea of ranked choice voting forward, people thought I was crazy to want to change the election system. Well, there's nothing wrong with it, except that we learned that there is. We need more choice in our elections, we need more voice, and we need to make sure that people have the right to vote their hopes, not their fears, to be able to vote for the candidates that they want. If this people's veto is successful, you do not have to choose one of us. And we should not have to do a people's veto, but we have to protect the people's vote. And here we are, you get an opportunity to vote for every single one of us, to rank us in order of preference. That is how you change the system so that we put power back into the hands of real people. And that's my reason for running for governor, and I hope you'll elect me.
Well, thanks again for having me. Democrats, those of us on this stage, those of you in the audience, and even people who aren't here tonight have a decision to make. We have to decide, are we going to be the party of fairness, of opportunity, of science, of regular people, or are we going to be the party that continues to pay lip service to those things while electing people who do things the way they've always been done? Part of the problem we have as Democrats is a lot of regular voters don't believe what candidates are telling them anymore. I'm asking for your vote because I believe the Democratic Party can restore fairness in Maine. We can tilt the balance of power away from the rich and the money and the lobbyists back to the regular people, the working people of Maine. There should be no doubt in the minds of anyone here that we Democrats represent the farmers, the teachers, the nurses, the dishwashers, the loggers, the working people of Maine. And I, for one, think it's time we started electing people who listen to those people first. My name is Jim Boyle, and I'm asking for your vote so we can restore fairness and opportunity to our state. Thank you.
Thank you again for inviting us and for all of you for attending tonight. If we're going to get anything done, we're going to get it done together. I mentioned earlier the Koch brothers and the lobby and the money that's involved, and other candidates have talked about the money in politics. She and I are running as a clean election candidate. That's a tough road because we can't take any more than $100 from any individual and none from companies and corporations. I'm running because I strongly believe in that principle. I believe in you, and I believe that if we work together and get the message out, that we can win this thing. And we can create a better Maine. I believe in a $15 minimum wage because I'm tired of subsidizing with welfare payments, Martins and the Walmarts and all the rest of that. I believe that a $15 wage is critical. I believe in organized labor because the Walmarts and the rest of those folks aren't going to step up and say, geez, we're going to give you a just wage. It doesn't work that way. We've got to fight just like we did back in the Gilded Age. Those of you that are history buffs. We also need to provide good jobs, and that requires, as Adam said, is thinking out of the box. I happen to like hemp farming because you can make 73 different products out of hemp. And people think of hemp, oh my God, that's marijuana. It's not marijuana. Henry Ford in 1941 was building cars out of hemp. So we can build 73 different products, manufacture and fill those mills up there. I believe that we should adopt the Portuguese method of decriminalization and treatment of our opioid problem. They dropped their opioid problem by 85% over there by decriminalizing and treating, as Adam was saying, as an addiction. I believe that we need broadband because 40% of our gross domestic product is produced in one county, and that's in Cumberland. So we have to work together. But we can't do that unless we get rid of the money out of our politics. Because if we try to get things passed like a referendum, bang. No, we're not going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much all for coming. Thanks for putting this on. It's been wonderful to talk with you. I look forward to talking with you out in the hallway. I agree that we have, at this moment, in this election, we have a choice. And we have a chance to make some fundamental change. We've all talked about the system being broken. You feel it, I feel it, we know it. We, in Maine especially, have gotten really good at resistance. I was up here for the Black Lives Matter March. We have all called Susan Collins to save the affordable health care. How many of you have done something like that? Some form of resistance, right? Raise your hand, right? We are good at that. We have gotten really good at saying no. But this election is our opportunity to say yes. To say yes to something that we can believe in. To change our system fundamentally, not by just doing things a little bit differently or tweaking around the edges, but really change how we elect people and the kind of people that we elect. Because if we don't get money out of politics, it's going to be the same old, same old. And we can't afford same old, same old. We can't afford because we need health care. We need clean energy. We need jobs, we need entrepreneurship, we need young people, we need new Americans to come here and stay here. And it's not until we get our democracy back into the hands of people that we can do that. So if you want to be part of something more than just a candidate, but part of a movement to save our democracy, to change, to put our democracy back into the hands of people, if you want to be part of a movement like that, then I ask you to join us. Because we can make fundamental change and have the joy, experience the joy of working together, of taking a risk of doing something different that is for the greater good. That is what campaigns should be about. That is what my candidacy is about, and that is what this election can be about. So in order to do that, I need 16,000 people in Maine, ultimately, to give $5 to the Clean Elections campaign, so that there's 16,000 voices that we hear. So I'm asking you to join us, come get an internship this spring. I'd love to have you work with us, and take 5 minutes to give $5 to keep democracy alive. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. That was really wonderful. Now we have a little bit of time for question and answer. We have time for about 3 questions. So we have some of our Colby Dems with microphones. If you want to raise your hand if you have a question for any particular candidate. Okay, first one I see in the white shirt. Speak right into the microphone, please.
Okay, I have a prepared question here. The people of Maine spend about $10 billion per year to keep all their cars going. And about 85% of that total, or $8.5 billion per year, leaves the state. Do you see that as a problem for Maine's economy? And if so, what could you do about that as governor?
Please keep your answers super brief.
Is there a certain order?
Just moving in the line.
Start with Ms. Mills.
Yeah.
So the question is, spending a lot of money on fossil fuels, basically, and getting rusty cars, and a lot of the money that we're putting into our cars goes out of state. That was your question, basically?
$8.5 billion a year leaving
Yeah.
the state.
Well, you know, just quickly, I had the chance to sue Volkswagen of America twice. And won pretty big settlements against Volkswagen of America. And I'm proud to say that as part of that settlement, for example, a third of their new vehicles will be all electric vehicles. All electric vehicles. And those are coming to Maine. So we need charging stations. We need other modes of funding our highways and bridges besides the highway tax, because that's gas tax based. So I'm all with you about reducing our dependency on foreign oil and gasoline, and about improving our roads, and about bringing more energy efficient cars. I sued the Trump administration over the CAFE standards as well to make sure we have energy efficient vehicles in the future.
That was about a minute, so why don't we keep the other answers to a minute?
So-
I can knock this up. Yes, we're one of the most reliant states in the country on relying on fossil fuels, not only for vehicles through transportation, but through home heating. And I would argue more money than that is leaving the state when you take into account that our military, part of that funding is maintaining our reliance on that foreign oil overseas. I'm a large proponent in Maine independence, energy independence, a large proponent that we can be the first state in the country that's 100% renewable. Part of that is not just through generation for heating our homes or cooling our homes, but it comes through vehicles as well. And I think the secondary and tertiary